Did you hide your grief or continue to hide your grief? Now, I've talked with lots of grievers and lots of people who were supporting or around grievers. And a lot of the people who aren't going through the grief would say things like, why didn't you tell me how bad things were? Or why don't you come to me when you're grieving? And as a griever myself, and as somebody who's lost lots of people, including my husband, there were many times I faked being happy and I faked being okay, but for a number of reasons. So I want to tell you some of the reasons I did not openly share how bad things were for me internally and in my head. So one, it's exhausting to talk about grief all the time. So when I ran into people in the store and they're like, how are you doing? I would say, I'm okay despite the circumstances. Also, there were people I didn't know well coming up to me because they had a curiosity about what happened. I think people are genuinely trying to figure out how to not be a 32-year-old widow themselves. But there are people who aren't close to me and who don't deserve the details of my grief and my turmoil. So I didn't give them much information because it wasn't any of their business. And also to talk about my loss and my grief in the middle of the grocery store would probably have me in tears. So I just avoided it. I cried enough on my own and I cried enough over lots of things that I didn't need to give myself reasons to cry. I did have people in my life who used to joke about, who did you make cry today, Linda? And it was just because people would talk about things and I would bring up the loss and they would be so sad for me that I would end up consoling them over my own grief. And that was, I joked for a long time that I was a professional consoler because I was always helping everybody else grip with the fact that I became a widow at 32. And apparently there is, according to everybody else's opinions about grievers, there's a socially appropriate amount to cry. And then after that, you're supposed to just get over it, or they just think you're supposed to be better. And that's just simply not the truth, because grief affects us the rest of our lives, not only from the loss of the person, but the secondary losses, which are very vast and immense, especially for those who are grieving the loss of their spouse and partner and or their child, like people who are really close to them. And so I think that often we hide the grief and the loss because we get told to get over it, or aren't you over that, or shouldn't you be better by now, as if we can get better from the loss. And so there are lots of reasons why people who are grieving hide their grief. Because, and for those of you who didn't hide your grief and who were able to share their emotions with people, I applaud you. It didn't feel like an option for me most of the time. And truly, I wanted to be okay, even when I wasn't. And I lied to myself about being okay for a long time, because I wanted to be okay. I didn't want to be sad all the time. I didn't want to be grieving all the time. So I tried to be okay. And what I can tell you is that as grievers, we need to be able to work through our grief and process our emotions. And there's a lot that happens behind scenes that you'll never see. But that's our business, and that's our way of grieving. And we don't have to be out in everybody's faces grieving to mean that we're still grieving. Just because your grieving family and friends may look okay doesn't mean that they're actually okay. But many of us just, hide the grief, hide the pain, because we don't want to feel like we're a burden to other people. We don't want to make them sad. We don't want to bring down the moment. We don't want to burst into tears on special days and special events, at family reunions or any of those things. And so we hide it. We mask it so that we can appear socially appropriate, because so many of us get the "aren't you over it yet?" Newsflash: we never get over the loss. We learn to live with it. We learn to carry it. And that's the best we can do, but you never get over the loss.